Turkish dictator Tayyip Erdogan is bent on forming a multinational Islamic army, or as he terms it, a mutual defense alliance. Hiding in the shadows cast by the American election, Turkey is beginning to assemble it, calling this army the West's greatest fear. That's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now. Now, Turkey is already in a multinational defense alliance, NATO. But Turkey is drifting or maybe running further away from that alliance on a weekly basis, calling their new pan-Turkish defense force the West's greatest fear. Certainly says what Erdogan thinks about NATO. Who is the West, after all, if not the nations of NATO? So, what Erdogan's doing should be their greatest fear? And calling it a defense force, and at the same time saying the West should fear it? Seems pretty contradictory, doesn't it? So I think we should term it an offensive force, the same kind that invaded the Kurdish regions of Iraq and Syria. And yes, the West should take Erdogan at his word. We should be wary of this. Erdogan plans to make this force up out of the nations that share a common Turkish national heritage in his ongoing effort to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. These countries are Azerbaijan and the former Soviet republics of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, known as the Stans, and even the European nation of Hungary. How big an army will this be? Currently, Turkey has the largest army in the Middle East, with like 355,000 troops. But Turkey isn't even in the top 10 worldwide. However, if these additional countries were added to the Turkish forces, it would double the size of Turkey's army, making it the 7th largest army in the world. But I bet Erdogan won't stop there. Now, if Erdogan were able to add just 2 more of the Stan countries from that region to his pan-Islamic army, and those countries would be Pakistan and Afghanistan, he would more than double it again to 1.4 million troops. And it would be the 2nd largest army on Earth, second only to China. Much larger than the USA's troops. Israel has an army of only 170,000, so it would be 10 times larger than Israel. When Erdogan says the West will fear this army, he wasn't kidding, especially given that Pakistan is a nuclear power. Imagine adding that to Erdogan's arsenal. Turkey has been moving forward toward this end for some time. The Turkic Council was established back in 2009 as a very peaceful, multinational organization with the aim of promoting cooperation. Its 4 founding member states were Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkey. A 5th nation, Uzbekistan, joined in 2019, and Hungary was granted observer status in 2018. My nephew was a missionary in one of these countries, Kyrgyzstan, 10 to 15 years ago. I can tell you, it was a very dark part of the world. Our communications via email or even letters had to be coded because we couldn't speak the name Jesus or God or spiritual things while he was over there. We referred to God as my Father and Jesus as my Father's Son. It was kind of really James Bondish kind of communication. Now, the spark for this multinational Islamic army was lit by Azerbaijan's victory over Armenia in their very recent militarized land dispute. After weeks of brutal and bloody fighting and facing defeat, the Armenians capitulated, and Azerbaijan, who was supported by Turkey, celebrated and added the disputed land to their nation. This mini-war was a test run, of the concept of a multinational army, with Turkey providing training, logistics, drones, etc. to assist Azerbaijan in its victory. And Israel's rabbis have noticed how such a multinational alliance prophetically matches in large portion the forces aligned with Gog when he invades Israel in Ezekiel 38. After many days, you, Gog, will be mustered. In the latter years you will go against the land that is restored from war, the land whose people were gathered from many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste. Its people were brought out from the peoples and now dwell securely, all of them. You will advance, coming on like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your hordes, and many people with you. Now, a lot of Christians believe Ezekiel 38 is strictly an event that happens after the millennium, after the 1,000 years in Revelation 20. But notice, this verse speaks of Israel having been a continual waste prior to being regathered. So for this reason, and many others, that simply cannot be speaking of a war that takes place after the millennium, as Israel will be populated and ruled by Jesus during that entire 1,000 years. So this invasion will happen before the return of Jesus. And it appears we are seeing the gathering and assembling of this force right now. And the objective of this offensive force is also coming into focus. And as you can see, this channel extrapolates that type of biblical truth and compares it to current world events, just as you're seeing in this video, to see how the biblical prophecy might be fulfilled. Consider joining us by subscribing to see more videos like this if that's important to you. Now, why is all this happening? Erdogan had this to say in an October 2020 statement that was also clouded by the contentious American election. In this city, and he was referring to Jerusalem, that we had to leave in tears during the First World War, it is still possible to come across traces of the Ottoman resistance. So Jerusalem is our city, a city from us. We consider it an honor on behalf of our country and nation to express the rights of the oppressed Palestinian people on every platform, with whom we have lived for centuries, he said. With this understanding, we will follow both the Palestinian cause, which is the bleeding wound of global conscience, and the Jerusalem case to the end. What end does Erdogan speak of in regard to Jerusalem? Obviously, the eventual invasion of Israel, and he would think the liberation of Jerusalem. That is why Erdogan is assembling this alliance of nations. His motivation is the invasion of Israel. And Ezekiel 38 is the ultimate expression of this desire. In fact, current world events, the assembly of the king of the north Islamic armies and the king of the south aligned with Israel is taking place right now, as we speak, right before our eyes. Click right here to keep watching to see who these nations are and how both of these alliances are being assembled. Or click right here to see if Erdogan is Gog himself, or does he play another role. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.